Seriously, take a second and think about your actions today.
Hmm.
Were they the result of pure, unadulterated free choice? A constant, conscious calculation of rules and options?
Probably not entirely, right?
Or could there be something deeper at play, something ingrained within you that you might not even recognize?
Yeah, that's really the question we're digging into today.
Today, we're going to challenge some fundamental assumptions about how we navigate the social world.
Because on this deep dive, we are plunging into the uh, absolutely revolutionary ideas of Pierre Bourdieu. We're unpacking his core framework, his theory of practice, the concept of habitus, and the fascinating mechanics of symbolic power.
And to guide us, we've got a stack of material, including excerpts from Bourdieu's own foundational work, Outline of a Theory of Practice.
Right, and some insightful looks at how these powerful ideas play out in the real world, particularly drawing on his ethnographic work in traditional Kabyle society.
Okay, so our goal is to get a handle on how Bourdieu pushed beyond traditional ways of thinking about social life.
Exactly. What he saw as the limits of approaches like, well, intellectualism and objectivism, he gives us a way to understand how deep social structures actually shape individuals and their actions, often in ways that completely bypass conscious thought.
Okay, let's get into it. Bourdieu wasn't just adding a new piece to the puzzle, he was critiquing the very way researchers, and let's be honest, probably all of us, tend to think about how society operates.
He really zeroed in on two common pitfalls. One he called intellectualism.
Intellectualism.
Okay, that's where you focus on the immediate lived experience, what it feels like to be in the world.
Like trying to capture the everyday, unquestioning way we just know how to navigate a sidewalk or a conversation, that sort of thing?
Right, but then there's objectivism, which goes the other way. It breaks away from that primary experience to build abstract models, external structures, or rules.
Ah, okay. Like structural linguistics or a structuralist anthropology, they build these complex systems from a distance.
Exactly, and Bourdieu's big issue with objectivism, as laid out in these sources, is that it tends to treat actual, messy, lived practice as almost irrelevant.
Right. It's seen as just an execution of the abstract model, or even dismissed as a waste product that doesn't fit the elegant structure.
Yeah, it's like getting lost in the blueprint and forgetting about the building where people actually live.
That makes sense.
Imagine an anthropologist trying to understand a community purely by analyzing their formal laws or drawing kinship diagrams without ever observing how people actually interact.
How they subtly bend or interpret those rules in daily life.
Precisely. They can get trapped by the official account people give them or stuck in a detached, purely theoretical view.
Ooh. Okay, time for a little Philosophy Friday moment here. Here's something to wrestle with. If we only focus on the written rules, the employee handbook, the traffic laws, the stated values of an organization, or just look at external structures like income brackets or job titles, are we really capturing the full, complex, often illogical reality of human social life? Think about your own day. How much was a conscious decision based on an explicit rule versus just how you do things?
That's a great question, and that's precisely where Bourdieu brings in the concept meant to bridge that gap, the heart of his theory. Habitus.
Ah, habitus, the star of the show. So what is habitus in Bourdieu's framework? Lay it out for us.
Okay, so it's described as a system of durable, transposable dispositions. Dispositions are basically ingrained tendencies, inclinations, ways of perceiving, appreciating, and acting.
Durable, transposable, meaning they last and they can be applied in different situations.
Exactly. And habitus isn't random. It's a product of the objective conditions and structures you grew up and live in, things like your family social class, your community, your era. It's called structured structures, predisposed to function as structuring structures.
Structured structures.
Okay,
So the world shapes you, and then you, with that shaping, go out and shape your interactions with the world. Is that the idea?
Precisely. And it's not something you're born with, but it's also not just intellectual knowledge you acquire. It's formed through a continuous, often unconscious process, a kind of dialectical loop.
A loop. How does that work?
Well, the objective structures of the social world produce your habitus, and then your habitus generates practices, your actions, your thoughts, your perceptions that tend to reproduce those very structures.
Okay, so that process, the sources describe as the dialectics of the internalization of externality and the externalization of internality, bringing the outside in and expressing that internalized outside back out through action.
Wow. And absolutely crucial part of this isn't just mental, it's physical, it's embodied. The social world is inscribed in the body itself. This is what he calls body hexes.
Body hex is like how I stand, how I walk, my gestures, that kind of thing.
Exactly that. But it's more than just posture. It's a whole comportment, ways of walking, sitting, using your hands, even speaking style. These are deeply ingrained bodily dispositions that carry social meaning.
So the body remembers.
Yeah, the body becomes a kind of memory, holding cultural principles in a practical, non-discursive form. These schemes for action are passed on, often without a single word being spoken, from practice to practice.
So when my grandmother insisted I stand up straight, she wasn't just giving posture advice. In Bourdieu's view, she might have been instilling a whole set of broader social or ethical principles through that physical correction. Seriously.
In a way, yes. I mean, seemingly small physical injunctions can instill broader cosmological or ethical schemas because the principles translate across domains. It's quite profound when you think about it.
Okay, so how exactly is this habitus built up then? Where does it come from?
It starts incredibly early, in the very first years of life, and it's constantly reinforced by what he calls calls to order from the group, the subtle or not so subtle signals about how you should be and act.
Right.
In societies without formal schools, this learning is anonymous and pervasive, coming from the entire community and the structured environment itself.
It's just soaking it in by being there. Like osmosis.
Pretty much, yes. And critically, it's learned in practice through doing, imitating, navigating the world, not by memorizing rules from a book. Children achieve practical mastery this way, below the level of conscious representation or discourse.
And you mentioned the environment. The physical space around us plays a role too.
Absolutely. The way a house is built and organized, for example, objectifies fundamental schemes and reinforces principles like the division between male and female spaces, public and private, sacred and profane.
So walking through the house is like practicing the social structure.
Your actions within these spaces become structural exercises,
Yeah.
physically reinforcing your understanding of these deep classifications. The environment itself is a teacher, not just the people in it.
Wow.
Precisely. And our experiences are layered chronologically. The earliest ones, especially within the family, have a disproportionate weight in shaping how we interpret and act in later experiences. This builds a unique, integrated set of dispositions.
Making your personal habitus a variation on the collective habitus of your group.
Exactly. And the sources mention how we subconsciously process the patterns of the world, like the likelihood of success or failure in certain paths.
Oh, right. How does that work?
Through repeated convergent experiences, we apprehend the objective structures of the social world, its probabilities, its constraints, as statistical regularities. This gives us an art of assessing likelihoods, a deeply ingrained sense of reality.
So it's not conscious math.
No, not usually. It's more like a gut feeling for what's probable or possible for someone like you in a situation like this. It anticipates the future and subtly steers your aspirations, your choices, your whole approach to the world, often without you even realizing it.
Okay, Philosophy Friday challenge number 2. Think about your own sense of reality right now. What career paths seem open or closed to you? What kinds of relationships feel possible? What aspirations feel realistic? How much of that feeling might be a product of these deep, unconscious processes, shaped by your specific environment and past experiences, rather than purely rational, independent assessment? It's kind of a humbling thought, isn't it?
It really is. And this brings us to how habitus actually operates moment to moment. It functions as this internal guiding principle, a matrix of perceptions, appreciations, and actions that generates thoughts and behaviors consistent with the conditions that originally produced it.
And this is where he famously takes on the fallacy of the rule. Tell us about that.
Right. So practices in a society are often objectively regulated and regular. They look orderly, like people are following rules.
You see patterns.
But Bourdieu argues this regularity isn't necessarily because people are consciously or even unconsciously obeying explicit rules. Instead, habitus generates practices that are adapted to the demands of a situation, often achieving goals without consciously aiming at those goals.
So the rule is more like an afterthought.
Often, yeah. The rule, if one is even articulated, might be a backup explanation or something you invoke when the smooth flow of habitus falters. The order we see comes from a deeper practical logic embedded in people's dispositions, not always from referencing a rulebook.
Practical logic.
Yeah.
How is that different from, well, logical logic?
Well, practical logic is different from formal logical logic. It works by taking liberties with strict logical principles. It might even tolerate apparent contradictions within the system.
Okay.
It's about mobilizing parts of your ingrained schemas in response to a situation to produce an action. And that action often serves multiple overlapping functions simultaneously.
This is where the Kabyle examples from the material become so clear, right? They really illustrate this.
Oh, absolutely. Look at their customary law. The sources describe it not as a written legal code, but as the product of these deep generative schemes, fundamental oppositions like house-other, night-day, male-female.
So the basic ways they classify the world.
Exactly. These schemes are applied case by case, almost like a Qadi justice. The severity of a theft, for instance, depends on where and when it happens, mapping onto these underlying classifications.
Like stealing from inside a dwelling at night is the most serious.
Precisely because it violates fundamental boundaries according to those schemas. It's like they're applying a classification system to the situation, not just looking up a crime and a punishment.
That's fascinating.
And rituals work similarly, drawing practical coherence from these schemes. The sources detail how actions in rituals moving east-west, using left-right hands, opening, closing things, uniting, separating objects, are generated by these same deep classification principles, simultaneously classifying objects and generating meaningful action. The difficulty, the sources note, is that anthropologists often struggle to grasp this practical logic because they're looking for explicit symbolic meanings or rules, not this deeper embodied structure.
Right, they're looking for the rule book again.
Kind of, yeah. And the fact that people within a group share similar habitus explains why they can interact so smoothly without constant explanation.
Ah, okay. Because everyone's running on similar software, so to speak.
Yes, because members of a community are exposed to and internalize similar structuring principles, their individual practices are objectively orchestrated, they fit together. This builds a shared, common-sense world, enabling immediate understanding without needing everything spelled out.
So coherence comes from these deeply embedded shared structures, not from constant explicit communication or rule following.
Exactly. It's a great analogy, the shared operating system.
Yeah.
And the sources use that powerful phrase. Habitus is history turned into nature.
History turned into nature.
Wow. It's the past, the accumulated experience of a group and an individual surviving within us, shaping our present actions, and naturally tending to reproduce the existing social structures. There's an inherent inertia, a tendency towards reproduction built into how habitus works.
Okay, Philosophy Friday challenge number 3. If habitus is history turned into nature inside us, guiding our actions often below the level of conscious thought or explicit rules, where does free will come into play?
The big question.
How much of our action is truly driven by independent rational calculation? And where else might this hidden embodied logic be operating in our own lives, our communities, our societies?
And building on this idea of practice and structured interaction, Bourdieu also introduces the crucial concept of symbolic power.
Okay, symbolic power. This isn't just brute force or economic coercion, right? You mentioned that earlier.
Absolutely not. Symbolic power functions precisely because it is disguised, because it is misrecognized for what it is. The material we have is very clear on this point.
Misrecognized meaning it's not seen as power at all. Like people don't realize it's happening.
Essentially, yes. Symbolic capital, things like prestige, renown, honor, credit, authority, is described as a transformed and thereby disguised form of physical economic capital. It's power, but it works because its origins in material interest or force are hidden. Its effectiveness lies in concealing its own nature.
Okay, another Philosophy Friday moment here. Does this make you rethink what power actually looks like? Is it always the person obviously giving orders or holding the purse strings?
Right.
Or does it often operate through much more subtle hidden means like who gets listened to, who gets respect, whose opinion carries weight that we don't even recognize as power?
That's exactly the kind of thing Bourdieu is pointing to. Especially in societies that don't have strong impersonal institutions like formal markets or a powerful state, the kind of archaic economies Bourdieu studied.
Like the Kabyle.
Yes, overt domination is difficult. Relations of dependence can't just be imposed. They have to be made, unmade, and remade in and by the interactions between persons. They require constant work, constant strategies which must be endlessly renewed.
It sounds exhausting.
It can be. And because overt economic self-interest is often frowned upon in these contexts, these relations of dependence have to be euphemized.
Euphemized meaning like Dressed up as something else?
Hidden, disguised socially, yes.
Yeah.
This is why misrecognition is key. The classic example from the sources is gift exchange.
Ah, the gift.
The time delay between giving a gift and receiving the counter gift isn't just politeness, it's absolutely essential for maintaining the sincere fiction that the exchange is disinterested, not just a crude transaction.
Right. If you give back immediately, it looks like a calculated trade. Takes all the social magic out of it.
Precisely. It exposes the underlying self-interest. The sources note that the labor required to conceal the function is as important as the labor needed to carry out the function itself.
Wow, so the work is in the performance of generosity.
Yes, an objectivist analysis that just records gift given, gift received, and ignores the time delay completely misses the symbolic work and the power dynamic. It sees the transaction, but not the social performance that makes it work.
Makes sense.
And this focus on symbolic capital means that sometimes accumulating honor or prestige is the primary way to gain influence, even at the expense of material wealth.
Really? You'd give up money for status?
In certain contexts, absolutely. Having wealth often implies social duties like generosity. Good reputation becomes a form of economic guarantee. Seemingly irrational economic acts like buying animals after harvest just to display wealth and then selling them later.
That sounds nuts.
Well, it makes perfect sense within this logic of accumulating and displaying symbolic capital through strategic performance.
Okay, so domination isn't just physical threats. It's creating obligations through gifts or debts, maintaining control through moral or affective ties.
Exactly. Overt violence exists, but often alongside symbolic violence, which is subtle, disguised, and often goes unrecognized as violence at all. In those pre-capitalist economies, the need for symbolic violence is particularly strong because material interests have to be disguised to be realized within the social logic.
And time itself isn't just a neutral dimension. The sources show it's a strategic tool used in these interactions.
Oh, definitely. Think about the logic of challenge and riposte in honor exchanges. Individuals remain in command of the interval you choose when to respond, if at all. Delaying revenge prolongs the threat.
So you control the timing.
Yes. Skilled social strategists build a capital of provocations by timing their actions carefully, like holding something over someone's head, choosing the moment to use it. Or in marriage proposals, a father might strategically delay his acceptance of a suitor to maximize his temporary advantage before agreeing.
Leveraging time.
And just in general interaction, holding back, putting off, hurrying, stealing a march, these are always, time is manipulated strategically to communicate value, signal distance, or maintain control. Even little presents, given periodically, are a way to maintain continuity of relations over time.
So time is currency, in a way.
And rituals often impose their own arbitrary, time-specific moments, tempos, durations, independent of external necessity. This arbitrary necessity of ritual time has a profound social function, integrating the group by enacting shared understandings through realized myth.
It's really vital to remember, isn't it, that these weren't abstract ideas Bourdieu just came up with in a vacuum. His theories, especially an outline of a theory of practice, were deeply rooted in his extensive ethnographic fieldwork.
Absolutely critical point. Yes, his time spent in Kabyle society wasn't just providing illustrations, it was the empirical bedrock, the foundation from which these concepts emerged.
You can see every single one of these concepts vividly in the Kabyle examples detailed in the material. Honor, for instance.
Right, with the concepts of nuf, the point of honor or pride linked to social potency, and herma, sacred honor. The logic of challenge and riposte, the spontaneous assessment of how serious an offense is, the meaning of a non-reply, the idea that challenges only matter from equals. It's all there.
And their customary law, that example of implicit logic versus explicit rules.
Perfect example. It's not a written code, but customary rules derived from those generative schemes like the house-other opposition determining theft severity, applied through a flexible kari justice in response to the specific situation.
Their embodied cosmology and ethics are literally built into space and time.
Totally. The way the house is structured, mirroring male-female divisions, the cardinal directions having meaning, the temporal cycles of day and night, the seasons, even nif, sexual potency, being intrinsically linked to social potency.
And the rituals.
Ritual praxis also draws directly from these schemes. The sources mention rituals of union and separation in marriage and plowing, like breaking an egg or pomegranate. Their rites of passage are tied to the agrarian calendar, showing the deep homology between the human life cycle and the seasonal cycle.
Procreation linked to autumn, Gestation to winter, childbirth to spring.
Exactly. Even the death of an outsider is seen as absolute because they lack descendants within the community to carry on their name, unlike the symbolic resurrection within the group.
And symbolic capital is everywhere in action.
Yeah.
Competition for prestigious names.
Marriage strategies like parallel cousin versus distant marriages, which aren't just about kinship, but about alliance strategies and reproducing social position. Political marriages, where women are treated almost as instruments to exhibit lineage prestige or the value of prestigious affines, literally referred to as wealth in rifles.
Wealth in rifles, wow.
Yeah.
And symbolic violence and euphemization.
Constantly. Gifts and debts creating subtle dependence. The contrast between distrustful market transactions with strangers versus trusting exchanges with kin, where middlemen or guarantors bridge that gap. Marriage solidifying previous exchanges, the collective pressure on wealthy individuals to redistribute resources through generosity.
Disguising material advantage as social virtue.
You got it.
So, pulling all of this together, Bourdieu gives us this incredibly powerful framework. He moves beyond simply looking at external social structures or just focusing on individual consciousness.
Right. He shows us how social reality is actually lived, embodied, and enacted through practice, guided by this concept of habitus, which is itself shaped by history.
And crucially, he highlights the power of misrecognition and euphemism, the idea that social relations, particularly power dynamics, often operate below the surface, invisible or disguised as something else entirely.
Whether that's tradition, generosity, respect, or simply the natural way things are.
So what does all this deep sociological and philosophical thinking mean for you right now listening? How do we apply this?
Well, think about your own social world. Where do you see unstated rules or a shared sense of reality subtly guiding behavior in your family, your workplace, your community, your friend group? Where is symbolic capital being accumulated or displayed, perhaps not with rifles, but with degrees, titles, reputation, or social connections? Where are material interests or power dynamics being disguised or euphemized through social performance, through gifts, favors, or appeals to tradition?
And how is your own sense of reality, that feeling for what's possible or likely for you, shaped by the deep, often unconscious experiences embedded in your past, your environment, your history turned into nature?
And this leads to our final Philosophy Friday reflection, a question that really sits with you after exploring Bourdieu. Given the powerful, often unconscious influence of habitus, these structured dispositions shaping our perceptions and actions, can we truly act completely outside the limits they impose? Or is our agency always operating through these structures, perhaps modifying them slightly, but never entirely free from their influence?
That's a heavy one.
It is. How does recognizing the power of habitus change how you view your own choices or the actions of others around you?
It's a lot to consider. Dwell on that powerful idea of habitus as embodied history. It's the past living on within us, shaping our present actions and tending to reproduce the social world we inhabit.
What does it truly mean to be guided, perhaps unknowingly, by a history that has, quite literally, become part of our nature? Food for thought indeed on this deep dive into Pierre Bourdieu.